Hello everyone, I'm going to be reading through the Argonian account today. We're going to be doing another Skyrim video, but today it's going to be reading through in-game books, and we're going to be starting with the Argonian account for no particular reason. I just decided to pick it. And so you pick up this book in Black Marsh, and this is going to be volume 1. So I'm going to be reading through the book written by Decumus Scotti. I'm sure there will be a lot of fun pronunciations in this one too, so please don't crucify me for mispronouncing anything. Okay. On a minor but respectable plaza in the imperial city sat, or perhaps lounged, Lord Venesh's building commission. It was an unimaginative, austere building, not noted so much for its aesthetic or architectural design as for its prodigious length. If any critics wondered why such an unornamented, extended erection held such fascination for Lord Venesh, they kept it to themselves. In the 398th year of the Third Era, Decumus Scotti was a senior clerk at the Commission. It had been a few months since the shy, middle-aged man had brought Lord Venesh the most lucrative of all contracts, granting the Commission the exclusive right to rebuild the roads of Valenwood, which had been destroyed in the 5-year war. For this, he had become the darling of the managers and the clerks, spending his days recounting his adventures, more or less faithfully, although he did omit the ending of the tale, since many of them had partaken in the celebratory Unthrapa roast provided by the Silentry. Informing one's listeners that they've gorged on human flesh improves very few stories of any good taste. Scotti was neither particularly ambitious nor hardworking, so he did not mind that Lord Venesh had not given him anything to actually do. Whenever the squat little gnomish man would happen upon Decumus Scotti in the offices, Lord Venesh would always say, "You're a credit to the Commission, keep up the good work." In the beginning, Scotti had worried that he was supposed to be doing something, but as the months went on, he merely replied, "Thank you, I will." There was, on the other hand, the future to consider. He was not a young man, and though he was receiving a respectable salary for someone not doing actual work, Scotti considered that soon he might have to retire and not get paid for not doing work. It would be nice, he decided, if Lord Venesh, out of gratitude for the millions of gold the Valenwood contract was generating, might deign to make Scotti a partner, or at least give him a small percentage of the bounty. Decumus Scotti was no good at asking for things like that, which was one of the reasons why, previous to his signal success in Valenwood as a senior clerk for Lord Atreus, he was a lousy agent. He had just about made up his mind to say something to Lord Venesh when his lordship unexpectedly pushed things along. "You're a credit to the Commission," the waddling little thing said, and then paused. "Do you have a moment free on your schedule?" Scotti nodded eagerly and followed his lordship to his hideously decorated and very enviable hectare of office space. "Xanathar blesses us for your presence at the Commission," the little fellow squeaked grandly. "I don't know whether you know this, but we're having a bad time before you came along. We had impressive projects, for certain, but they were not successful. In Black Marsh, for example, for years we've been trying to improve the roads and other routes of travel for commerce. I put my best man, Flickering, on it, but every year, despite staggering investments of time and money, the trade along those routes only gets slower and slower. Now we have your very clean, very, very profitable Valenwood contract to boost the Commission's profits. I think it's time you were rewarded." Scotti grinned a grin of great modesty and subtle avarice. "I want you to take over the Black Marsh account from Flickering." Scotti shook as if awakening from a pleasant dream to a hideous reality. "My lord, I couldn't." "Nonsense," chirped Lord Venesh. "Don't worry about Tiho. He'll be happy to retire on the money I give him, particularly as soul-wrenchingly difficult as Black Marsh business has been. Just your sort of challenge, my dear Decumus." Scotti couldn't utter a sound, though his mouth feebly formed the word, "No," as Lord Venesh brought out the box of documentation on Black Marsh. You're a fast reader, Lord Vanesh guessed. You can read it all en route. En route to Black Marsh, of course, the tiny fellow giggled. You're a funny chap. Where else would you go to learn about the work that's being done and how to improve it? The next morning, the stack of documentation hardly touched, Decumus Scotti began the journey southeast to Black Marsh. Lord Vanesh had hired an able-bodied guard, a rather taciturn red guard named Mylik, to protect his best agent. They rode south along the Nibbin, and then southeast along Silverfish, continuing on into the wilds of Cyrodiil, where the river tributaries had no names, and the very vegetation seemed to come from another world than the nice civilized gardens of the northern imperial province. Scotty's horse was tied to Mylik, so the clerk was able to read. It made it difficult to pay attention to the path they were taking. But Scotti knew he needed at least a cursory familiarity with the Commission's business dealings in Black Marsh. It was a huge box of paperwork, going back 40 years, when the Commission had first been given several million gold by a wealthy trader, Lord Zeligals Pinos Ravina, to improve the condition of the road from Gideon to Cyrodiil. At that time, it took 3 weeks, a preposterously long time, for the rice and the root he was importing to arrive, half-rotten, in the imperial province. Pinos Ravina was long dead, but many other investors over the decades, including Pelagius V himself, had hired the Commission to build roads, drain swamps, construct bridges, and devise anti-smuggling systems, hire mercenaries, and, in short, do everything that the greatest empire in history knew would work to aid trade with Black Marsh. According to the latest figures, the result of this was that it took 2.5 months for goods, now thoroughly rotten, to arrive. Scotti found that when he looked up after concentrating on what he was reading, the landscape had always changed. Always dramatically. Always for the worst. "This is Blackwood, sir," said Mylik to Scotty's unspoken question. It was dark and woodsy, so Decumus Scotti thought it had a very appropriate name. The question he longed to ask, which in due course he did ask, was, "What's that terrible smell?" "Slough Point, sir," Mylik replied as they turned the next bend, where the umbrageous tunnel of tangled tree and vine opened to a clearing. There squatted a cluster of formal buildings in the dreary imperial design favored by Lord Vanesh's commission, and every emperor since Tiber, together with the stench so eye-blindingly, stomach-wrenchingly awful that Scotti wondered, suddenly, if it were deadly poisonous. The swarms of blood-colored, sand-grain-sized insects obscuring the air did not improve the view. Scotti and Mylik paddled at the buzzing clouds as they rode their horses towards the largest of the buildings, which on approach revealed itself to be perched at the edge of a thick black river. From its size and serious aspect, Scotti guessed it to be the Census and Excise office for the wide, white bridge that stretched across the burbling dark water to the reeds on the other side. It was a very nice, bright, sturdy-looking bridge, built, Scotti knew, by his commission. A poxy, irritable official opened the door quickly on Scotty's first knock. Come in quickly. Don't let the flesh flies in." "Flesh flies?" Decumus Scotti replied. "You mean they eat human flesh?" "If you're fool enough to stand around and let them," the soldier said, rolling his eyes. He had half an ear, and Scotti, looking around at the other soldiers in the fort, noted that they were all well chewed. One of them had no nose at all to speak of. "Now, what's your business?" Scotti told them, and added that if they stood outside of the fortress instead of the inside, they might catch more smugglers. "You better be more concerned with getting across that bridge," the soldier sneered. "Tide's coming up, and if you don't get a move on, you won't get to Black Marsh for 4 days." That was absurd. A bridge swamped by a rising tide on a river? Only the look in the soldier's eyes told Scotti he wasn't joking. Upon stepping out of the fort, he saw that the horses, evidently tired of being tortured by the flesh flies, had ripped free of their restraints and were bounding off into the woods. The oily water of the river was already lapping on the planks, oozing between crevices. Scotti reflected that perhaps he would be more than willing to endure a wait of 4 days before going to Black Marsh, but Mylik was already running across. Scotti followed him, wheezing. He was not in excellent shape, and never had been. The box of commissioned materials was heavy. Halfway across, he paused to catch his breath, and then discovered he could not move. His feet were stuck. The black mud that ran through the river was a thick, gluey paste, and having washed over the plank Scotti was on, it held his feet fast. Panic seized him. Scotti looked up from his trap and saw Malik leaping across from plank to plank ahead of him, closing fast on the reeds on the other side. "Help!" Scotti cried. "I am stuck." Malik did not even turn around, but kept jumping. "I know, sir. You need to lose weight." Decumus Scotti knew he had a few pounds over, and had meant to start eating less and exercising more, but embarking on a diet hardly seemed to promise timely aid in his current predicament. No diet on Nirn would have helped him just then. However, on reflection, Scotti realized that the Red Guard intended that he drop the box of documents, for Malik was no longer carrying any of the essential supplies he had with him previously. With a sigh, Scotti threw the box of commissioned notes into the glop, and felt the plank under him rise a quarter of an inch, just enough to free him from the mud's clutches. With an agility born of extreme fear, Scotti began leaping after Malik, dropping onto every third plank, and springing up before the river gripped him. In 46 leaps, Decumus Scotti crashed through the reeds onto the solid ground behind Malik, and found himself in Black Marsh. He could hear behind him a slurping sound as the bridge and his container of important and official records of commission affairs was consumed by the rising flood of dark filth, never to be seen again. Book 2, The Argonian Account. Decumus Scotti emerged from the dirt and reeds, exhausted from running, his face and arms sheathed in red flesh flies. Looking back towards Cyrodiil, he saw the bridge disappear beneath the thick black river, and he knew he was not getting back until the tide went down in a few days' time. The river also held, in its adhesive depths, his files on the Black Marsh account. He would have to rely on his memory for his contacts in Gideon. Malik was purposefully striding through the reeds ahead. Flailing ineffectually at the flesh flies, Scotti hurried after him. "We're lucky, sir," said the Red Guard, which struck Scotti as an extraordinarily odd thing to say, until his eyes followed where the man's finger was pointing. "The caravan is here." 21 rusted, mud-spattered wagons with rotting wood and wobbly wheels sat half-sunk in the soft earth ahead. A crowd of Argonians, gray-scaled and gray-eyed, the sort of sullen manual laborers that were common in Cyrodiil, pulled at one of the wagons which had detached from the others. As Scotti and Malik came closer, they saw it was filled with a cargo of blackberries so decayed that they'd become hardly recognizable, more a festering jelly than a wagon load of fruit. Yes, they were going to the city of Gideon, and yes, they said, Scotti could get a ride with them after they were finished unloading the shipment of lumberries. "How long ago were they picked?" Scotti asked, looking at the wagon's rotten produce. "The harvest was in the last seed, of course," said the Argonian who seemed to be in charge of the wagon. It was now sun's dusk, so they had been en route from the fields for a little over 2 months. Clearly, Scotti thought there was a problem with transportation, but fixing that, after all, was what he was doing here as representative of Lord Vanesh's building commission. It took close to an hour of the berries rotting even more in the sun for the wagon to be pushed to the side, the wagons in the front of it and behind it to be attached to one another, and one of the 8 horses from the front of the caravan to be brought around to the now independent wagon. The laborers moved with dispirited lethargy, and Scotti took the opportunity to inspect the rest of the caravan and talk to his fellow travelers. 4 of the wagons had benches in them, fit for uncomfortable riders. All the rest were fit with grain, meat, and vegetation in various stages of corruption. The travelers consisted of the 6 Argonian laborers, 3 imperial merchants so bug-bitten that their skin looked as scaly as the Argonians themselves, and 3 cloaked fellows who were evidently Dunmer, judging by the red eyes that gleamed in the shadows under their hoods. All were transporting their goods along the Imperial Commerce Road. "This is a road," Scotti exclaimed, looking at the endless field of reeds that reached up to his chin or higher. "It's solid ground of a sort," one of the hooded Dunmer shrugged. "The horses eat some of the reed, and sometimes we set fire to it, but it just grows right back up." Finally, the wagon master signaled that the caravan was ready to go, and Scotti took a seat in the third wagon with the other Imperials. He looked around, but Malik was not on board. "I agreed to get you to the Black Marsh and take you back out," said the Red Guard, who had plumped down a rock in the sea of reeds and was munching on a hairy carrot. "I'll be here when you get back." Scotti frowned, and not only because Malik had dropped the deferential title Sir when addressing him. Now he knew truly no one in Black Marsh, but the caravan slowly grinded and bumped forward, so there was no time to argue. A noxious wind blew across the Commerce Road, casting patterns in the endless, featureless expanse of the reeds. In the distance, there seemed to be mountains, but they constantly shifted, and Scotti realized they were banks of mist and fog. Shadows flitted across the landscape, and when Scotti looked up, he saw they were being cast by giant birds with long, saw-like beaks nearly the size of the rest of their bodies. Hackwings. Caro, an Imperial on Scotti's left, who might have been young but looked old and beaten, muttered, "Like everything else in this damnable place, they'll eat you if you don't keep moving. Beggars pounce down and give you a nasty chop, and then fly off and come back when you're mostly dead from blood loss." Scotti shivered. He hoped they'd be in Gideon before nightfall. It was then it occurred to him that the sun was on the wrong side of the caravan. "Excuse me, sir," Scotti called to the wagon master. "I thought you said we were going to Gideon?" The wagon master nodded. "Why are we going north then, when we should be going south?" There was no reply but a sigh. Scotti confirmed with his fellow travelers that they too were going to Gideon, and none of them seemed very concerned about the circuitous route to getting there. The seats were hard on his middle-aged back and buttocks, but the bumping rhythm of the caravan and the hypnotic weaving reeds gradually had an effect on him, and Scotti drifted off to sleep. He awoke in the dark some hours later, not sure where he was. The caravan was no longer moving, and he was on the floor, under the bench, next to some small boxes. There were voices, speaking a hissing, clicking language that Scotti didn't understand. And he peeked out between someone's legs to see what was happening. The moons barely pierced the thick mist surrounding the caravan, and Scotti did not have the best angle to see who was talking. For a moment, it looked like the gray wagon master was talking to himself, but the darkness had movement and moisture, in fact, glistening scales. It was hard to tell how many of these things there were, but they were big, black, and the more Scotti looked at them, the more details he could see. When one particular detail emerged, huge mouths filled with dripping needle-like fangs, Scotti slipped back under the bench. Their black little eyes had not fallen on him yet. The legs in front of Scotti moved and then began to thrash as their owner was grabbed and pulled out of the wagon. Scotti crouched further back, getting behind the little boxes. He didn't know much about concealment, but had some good experience with shields. He knew that having something, anything, in between you and bad things was always good. A few seconds after the legs had disappeared from sight, there was a horrible scream, and then a second and a third. Different timbres, different accents, but the same inarticulate message. Terror and pain. Horrible pain. Scotti remembered a long-forgotten prayer to the god Stendar and whispered it to himself. Then there was silence. Ghastly silence that lasted only a few minutes, but which seemed like hours. Years. And then the carriage started rolling forward again. Scotti crawled out from under the carriage. Caro Gemellus gave him a bemused grin. "There you are," he said. "I thought the Nagas took you." "Nagas?" "Nasty characters," Gemellus said, frowning. "Puff adders with legs and arms, 7 feet tall, 8 when they're mad, come from the inner swamp, and they don't like it here much, so they're particularly peevish. You're the kind of posh Imperial they're looking for. Scotti had never in his life thought of himself as a posh. His mud and fleshfly bespeckled clothing seemed eminently middle class at best to him. What would they want me for? To rob, of course, the Imperial smiled, and to kill. You didn't notice what happened to the others? The Imperial frowned, as if struck by a thought. You didn't sample from those boxes down below, did you? Like the sugar, do you? Gods, no, Scotti grimaced. The Imperial nodded, relieved. You just seem a little slow. First time to Black Marsh, I gather? Oh, hey-ho. Scotti was just about to ask Decumus what that vulgar term meant when the rain began. It was an inferno of foul-smelling, yellow-brown rain that washed over the caravan, accompanied by the growl of thunder in the distance. Decumus worked to pull the roof up over the wagon, glaring at Scotti until he helped with the laborious process. He shuddered, not only from the cold damp, but from the contemplation of the disgusting precipitation pouring down on the already nasty produce in the uncovered wagon. We'll be dry soon enough, Decumus smiled, pointing out into the fog. Scotti had never been to Gideon, but he knew what to expect. A large settlement, more or less laid out like an imperial city, with more or less imperial-style architecture, and all the imperial comforts and traditions, more or less. The jumble of huts half sunk in the mud was decidedly less. Where are we? Asked Scotti, bewildered. Hickson Noeg, replied Decumus, pronouncing the queer name with confidence. You were right. We were going north, when we should have been going south.